Welcome to the Ten12, the podcast that covers all 10 teams in the Big 12 Conference, plus BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. We are, of course, the flagship show of the Ten12 Network and partners with Sports Drink, your water cooler for sports and not sports. I am your host, Phillip Slavin. Thank you for joining us on this holiday, Labor Day, Monday. I am coming to you from my childhood bedroom closet. It is going to be a hot night in here. Obviously, there's no air circulation, so I'm going to get through all of this as quickly as possible so I am not a sweaty mess. It's this Labor Day holiday. When you have kids, holidays tend to be geared around the children. I like to say that my mother is basically Werner Herzog in The Mandalorian and just has the line of, "I want to see the baby." Of course, we had a fantastic Labor Day of football. There are still games going on right now, but I couldn't care less about LSU, Florida State, and whatever that just sacrifice to the football gods that we're going to have on Monday that is Clemson, Georgia Tech. I'm sorry, Jeff Scott. So we've got a few games to talk about tonight. Joining me, as he always does, my good friend and, of course, the host of the Rock Chalk podcast, part of the 1012 Network, Andy Mitts.
It's great to be back.
Always good to have you. JSJ is not here. She is celebrating Christmas in September in Ohio. 3 things you don't really cram into one sentence together. But in her stead, very excited to have a guest I have been wanting to get on the show for some time. This was a great opportunity, and I am thrilled that it worked out. He is the Texpert himself, Sam Khan of The Athletic. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
I appreciate it, man. I really do. Look, we've got a lot of games to get to. Some good, some bad. Nice weekend for the Big 12. I hate that we have to kick things off this way, but it is the biggest story of the weekend in college sports, so we're going to start here. Part of this is because it's the topic everybody wants to talk about, and also I kind of want to just get it out of the way so we can talk about actual football that was played this weekend, because we finally had it, and I don't want to talk about the other mechanisms and things that are going on in the sport like we've been doing for the last 2 months. But playoff expansion is coming. It is official. We are going to have playoff expansion. It is the proposal that was pitched last year, what Bob Bowlesby was a part of. We're finally going to have it. We know, quite a lot about it. 12 teams, first 4 teams get a bye. The top 6 ranked conference champions, top 6, doesn't matter what conference they're from, all get an automatic qualifier in, and then 6 at-large teams. Teams 5, 6, 7, and 8 will host the first round games at their home or a stadium of their choosing, which I believe is really just set up because you have teams like Pittsburgh who play in an NFL stadium. And then the rest of the games will be played at bowl sites to be predetermined. This is going to come about no later than 2026, but could start as early as 2024. Sam, you cover, obviously, the state of Texas and college football over the place for The Athletic, so I want to get you in here first. I want your opinion as someone who covers the state of Texas, which has a lot of current and, of course, another future Big 12 team coming in. For the Big 12 conference itself, where do you see the pluses to this, and are there negatives for the Big 12 now that this is officially going to be happening?
Yeah, no, I see mostly positives because it comes down to one word: access. The Big 12 will now have access to the playoff, and that was understood when they first proposed this because of the format: 6 highest-ranked champions. So in most years, your Big 12 champion is going to be one of the 6 highest-ranked conference champions. So that gives you a path in the playoff. And if you look at a year like last year, where you didn't make the 4 team, you would have had Baylor and Oklahoma State in there. Oklahoma would have made it. So it gives you a chance to actually have teams get in this mix, as opposed to what it has been in the past, which has been Oklahoma or nothing. And so that access is important to the sport. It's important to the Big 12, and it's important to every league not named the SEC and the Big 10. So I'm thrilled that it finally happened. I'm disappointed that it took as long as it did, because we essentially have the exact same proposal that we did in June 2021. But I'm glad that we got it, because I think for the greater good of the sport, it was necessary to keep as many conferences as possible in the mix for a title run.
Well, and it's also one of those things, like, it makes sense for everybody involved, right? Like, it makes sense for the SEC and the Big 10 for them to have the opportunity to get more teams in the playoff. It makes sense for the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, all who have been shut out of the playoff multiple times. And then, of course, it gives the G5 schools an opportunity to play their way in, because it's the top 6 conference champions. And so, and I can guarantee there's going to be at least a few years where a conference like the Pac-12 is not going to have their best champion who makes it, or like if there's a year that the ACC's down, like and Clemson isn't very good, and you could see opportunities where the ACC may not have a better conference champion than all of the G5. So like there's definitely a good opportunity for everybody now to have a chance to make it to the playoff. It brings us in a step in the direction towards like what the NCAA basketball tournament is, where all anybody wants for the NCAA basketball tournament is a chance to play for a championship. Even though we know that like the champion is probably coming from a group of 8 to 10 schools that we can identify well before the tournament actually starts, usually. Here in football, there's probably going to be a group of 3 or 4 schools that everybody is like, hey, those are the teams that are most likely going to be able to make it to the championship. But part of what makes college basketball tournament so great is the potential for chaos. And you can't have any chaos if there's only 4 schools that are invited to a playoff. If you have 12, now there's more chance for a playoff. There's more chance for a team to build some momentum from some of those earlier round games to potentially give us some entertaining games. Now, are we going to have some duds? Of course, but we've had plenty of duds with a 14 playoff, format right now. So like, it makes sense for everybody. It brings more money for everybody. It does absolutely everything you want. And I agree. Like, it wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when and how quickly could they make it happen and start profiting off of it.
We've said this before on the show. The reason that I have been on board with this the most is access is a big thing, but using the March Madness as a reference, how big is it for your school to make it? How excited are you as a program to get there? And the way we now treat bowl games, the way they are talked about, the way they are discussed, even the New Year's Six Bowls, even those, you have players sitting out. Now, you have games, and you know what? Look, there's probably still going to be a player or two who sits out the playoff if they're the 12 seed, right? Maybe it's a LSU who gets in as the 12 seed, and you've got some players who are like, no, I'm just going to go get ready for the NFL. I don't care. That's fine. But now you can say I've made the playoff, and making the playoff and taking those bowl games, even they're going to bowl games, now suddenly it is a big deal you can hang a banner for and you can be excited for. And that is a good thing. That means more fan bases can care that much more about the postseason. And I love that. Okay, so let me ask you guys this, because the one thing that didn't get spelled out to me that I'm a little bit confused by. We know the 6 highest ranked conference champions automatically make the postseason, make the tournament. We know that the top 4 highest ranked conference champs earn the top 4 seeds, earn the bye. Do the other 2 conference champs automatically get seeds 5 and 6, or are they just kind of fall into that 5 through 12? Because of right now, 5 through 12 is supposed to just be, as I understand, the other 6 teams are just the next highest ranked, doesn't matter what, they are just the next highest ranked teams. Do the 2 other conference champs auto get seeds 5 and 6 and guarantee themselves a home game to open it? Or do they just fall, they're just guaranteed to get in and then they just fall within the rest and are just going to be seeded wherever based off of where they are ranked? That is the one thing that was not clarified that I am very curious about.
I think just looking at and going back and rereading some of this, like, it talks about the 4 highest ranked conference champions are seeded 1 through 4. And then, 5 through 12 is just everybody else. It's, the next ones that are ranked. So yeah, I don't think that they get any kind of special protected status. But this is where you're going to run into potentially an instance where, say, if a Notre Dame, as an independent is a really good team that year and they end up, second in the rankings, well, they're going to be seeded as a 5th team because they are not coming from a conference championship. You could find instances where there are teams, or even if there's 2 really good SEC teams up at the top, that means that the SEC champion is going to be much more important because they'll get the overall number 1, and then whoever loses that game gets the 5 no matter what. So this is, I think it makes it a big deal to be one of those 4 conference champions, and you could see a Big 12 school, and potentially, an ACC or a Pac-12 school get that 4 seed and put themselves in a good situation compared to a team that's supposed to be much better than them. Of course, that means they're probably going to end up playing that 5 seed, right? They may have a tougher road in their quarterfinal game, but they will have the benefit of being into the quarterfinal game. At that point, being into a quarterfinal game for sure, and having been protected as one of the top 4 seeds.
Yeah, I think that you're right. We don't have clarity on that, and I would be fascinated to see what they say about it, because that is going to be, I think, important in this whole equation, because you could have the 4th seed in the top 4 could be the 7th best team in the tournament. ostensibly. And so my gut feeling, and this is without any inside knowledge of the playoffs, because I just haven't covered the playoff stuff as closely, but my gut feeling is that after that top four, that they won't, because of the potential of that chaos, because that sixth conference champion, and most years probably is a group of five team, and I just can't see them giving a group of five team a home game. As cool as it would be really cool to see. Let's just say, for sake of argument, SMU. If SMU hosted a playoff game before, that would be really cool. But I doubt. I just knowing how that stuff typically works, I don't think they would end up going that route.
Well, and you could theoretically have an instance like, I believe it was the ACC, the one year that Florida State, it was like a 3-loss team or something that won the ACC. I could have the team wrong completely, but there was, we've had an instance before where one of the Power 5 conference champions who ended up making it was, like they would have been the 6th best conference champion. And for them to automatically get the number 6 seed and get to host a game when they basically are just there because they happen to be better than a whole bunch of other not so great teams, or even if, heaven forbid, we got into a situation where the 6th best conference champion wasn't even in the top 12. Like they were, if they were like the 21st ranked team or something like that, but they were the 6th best conference champion, you're going to jump them up to the 6th seed and give them the benefit of playing a home game in the first round of the playoffs. I highly doubt that they would let that happen, but they have to clarify it. We have to know what it is. Obviously, there's plenty of time for them to work out the logistics, because as much as they say this could be getting done earlier, I have a hard time imagining it's going to be in place for next season.
Well, they said that the earliest that anyone has rumored is 2024.
Or 2024, right.
My bet is at worst it's, let's see, the current contract ends in after 2025, correct, Son? So the new contract for the playoff would begin in 2026 or 2025?
I think it's after 2020. I think 2026 will start. That's the earliest that you could have a new playoff.
Obviously, this whole thing feels like school presidents going, how much money are we leaving on the okay, quit it and get it done. You idiots, you petty little, we got all realignments, and that's the last thought. Sorry, I'm rambling. But conference consolidation, unless the Big Ten or the SEC comes poaching, is over. I think when you provide this level of access, unless you are going to increase a school's budget by double or more, we're done. We're done moving. The Pac-12, the Pac-10 is set unless you bring in a G5 school. That's one thing. But as far as Big 12, Pac-10 stealing from each other, I think this is done. I think the ACC
I think
is
there's
set
still potentially room depending on what the offer that the Pac-12 gets, right? Like, there's still some room, but it's not likely that it's going to be this reoccurring, year after year we're seeing stuff shuffle. One, because I just don't think the Big Ten and the SEC have the appetite to be doing this every single year and having to deal with it.
I remain convinced from everyone I've talked to, period, that there is neither the Big 12 nor Pac-12's what they're going to get from TV revenue is going to be substantially different enough to convince anyone to go one way or the other. And so at this point, with so many other factors that influence this, if you're a Pac-12 school, how much of your alumni base is on the actual West Coast, is in California? You want to play schools in the state of California on a regular basis because that's where you're located. So all the other factors, this is why, unless your budget's going to at least double, I think we're done. I think this seals that. This puts a cap on it until the Big Ten or SEC may decide to make whatever moves they want to make after the ACC's contract comes up in another, I think, 300 years for the ESPN. Okay. Last comment, shout out to Ross Dellinger, posted this on Twitter. Bob Bowlesby recently retired. Of course, the former Big 12 commissioner, was part of the group that put this 12-team expansion into place behind closed doors in secret that was announced last year. Quote, imagine that, he replied. Asked to describe the year-long negotiations with commissioners, he said, I'd call it tortured. Somebody, I don't know how much money to throw at him. Somebody go and get him in a studio on a phone and let him just, you can say whatever you want. You're no longer employed by a conference. Just tell us how you really feel about the last year and all this nonsense that's come on. Man, there's an ESPN 30 for 30. Just sit down, Bob Bowlesby, and let him rant.
That's a good, and I'm going to tell him next time I talk to my good friend Max Olson, I'm going to run that one by him and say, hey, just go let Bob rip for a while.
Say whatever you want, man. Whatever you'd like to say.
I would say, Phillip, we just need to make sure that, when he goes and does that and runs the story, that you get a shout out for that idea. So,
hey, you know what? I will know in my heart. I'll know. Okay. So let's talk about football. Man, there was quite a bit of good football this weekend, and I know it did not go the way that the Big 12 and West Virginia would have wanted it to go, but I mean, this is why we need more regional rivalries played on a regular basis, okay? This is why we need these things. The backyard brawl, finally back after a decade, did not disappoint. That game was ridiculous. Absolutely crazy. Heartbreaking and crushing in the end. The Pitt Six was, oof. I mean, oof. You come away from that game, and if you're West Virginia, you just, I get it. I listened to Brandon Phoenix of Raspy Voice Kids, our West Virginia show. I listened to his little 7-minute response. You could tell 7 minutes was the most he could get out of himself. That's all he had left in the tank after that loss, especially that night. And I get it. You had that game, and it fell apart. And look, I'm going to say this. If you think this all came down to Neil Brown's decision not to go for that 4th and short, and if they had just gone for that, they'd have won this game. Maybe they don't get it. Because, again, it's a 50-50. There's literally a Twitter account that tracks, like, what you should do on 4th down. And I need to go find it, and I will find the Twitter account. But, I mean, it literally is running the measurements of should you go for it or should you not. And it was basically like a eh. There was not like a yes, you should go for it, you're an idiot. It was an eh. One way or the other. So we can all sit here and say, you should have done it. I've seen plenty of times where you should do it. Oh, they're going to do it. Oh, they don't get it. He made a decision he thought was right. It's not his fault that the defense then just decided to not play defense and let Pitt basically march down the field for the longest drive they'd had, if not all night, for a very long time in that game, and score a touchdown, and then have, off the hands of the best player on the field all night, just bounce off his fingers into a defender's hands who is able to find a path all the way to the end zone. I mean, there is a point in college football where you have to look at things and go, I don't think the college football gods were on our side tonight. And that's a little bit of how that game felt. That's because it was that close and it came down to a few just little bang, bang, didn't bounce your way plays, and Pitt is the victor, and West Virginia starts the season 0-1. Sam, I'm going to start with you here. What is the one big takeaway you have as far as West Virginia? Did that game change your opinion on them for the season coming in? Or what do you think about West Virginia now that game has wrapped?
No, I don't I don't think it changed my opinion very much of them. I thought they were a team under Neil Brown, in my opinion. This is a team that's played hard pretty consistently under him. They haven't been the most talented. They haven't been a team that's gone out and dazzled us by any stretch, but they play hard and they played hard on Thursday. I like a lot of what I saw from JT Daniels, from Graham Harrell. Obviously don't like a lot of what I saw up front. JT got hit a lot. But you like what you saw from the run game, and so there was a good mixed bag in there. And I think this is a team that, if you can get over this is a team that can still be a factor in the conference race. There's enough there from a playmaking standpoint. There's enough there from a leadership standpoint. There's enough there, even defensively. Like I said, those lapses obviously late were difficult, but they were in position. They were in position in this game. So it's a rivalry game. I chalk it up to that. And, one that came down to the wire, one that could have gone either way, one that, very, very, we're talking about inches at the end, with a catch at the end of the ball game. So, or not catch. So I think I still think this is a team that I felt fairly optimistic about coming in. And I think I still feel that way despite the loss.
Yeah. I mean, looking at this game, they say all the time, you should not overreact to week 1 results. And honestly, especially when that week 1 result is part of a rivalry game, because we know, there is lots of documented evidence that teams either play up really well or play down really bad, and you have no idea which one it is, until you have a full body of work from the season. So, I still am undecided on what this West Virginia team is going to be. Now, granted, part of that is because I do think that Kansas has a good opportunity to go and knock them off this weekend, but that might be my own personal bias. But, I mean, I don't think any of the questions I had from West Virginia got answered in this one, and I also don't know that even if they had been gotten, even if I had gotten answers from this game, I don't know how much I can trust it, given that it is the first time they've played Pitt in a really long time. It was a huge hyped up matchup. And there was some stuff there that they did that I just couldn't figure out why. Like, it seemed like they had a very effective running game for a large portion of that game. And then you went into the fourth quarter when the game was still close, and it seemed like they just went away from it entirely. And I don't know why you make those decisions. I understand you brought in, JT Daniels, and you want him to be able to kind of get going. But when you're that close in a game that, my understanding from this West Virginia team is that they expect their running game to be one of the things that powers them offensively. But to go away from that in such a crucial situation and it ends so disastrously for you, like, you have to be second guessing that. Like, again, I don't know how far this is going to go, what kind of momentum this is going to have for them going through the rest of the season. But there was enough there that if you want to be worried, you can be worried about this West Virginia team. If you want to find a bunch of positives, I think there was enough there. But it's all being kind of shrouded by the fact that this is the first time they played Pitt in forever. And, everybody was super hyped up for this game. Did that make them play worse? Did it make them play better? I have absolutely no idea.
I think for West Virginia at this point, I feel better about them against the teams I would project towards the bottom of the conference, where I am now the most worried, as I always was, but now definitely more based off the way the offensive line performed. Look, give Pitt's defensive line credit. They are really, really good. But West Virginia has to face Baylor and their defensive line, Oklahoma State and their defensive line, and Kansas State and their defensive line. Those are going to be 3 games that I already probably would have circled as losses, but now I feel even more so. That offensive line is going to have to make a lot of adjustments quickly. Again, it's week 1. You've got a lot of time to make changes. And for West Virginia, you get Kansas at home this week. We'll talk about that coming up. Towson before a road game at Virginia Tech, who... if they could have beat Pitt, that 4-0 bet that I had was, I'm sorry, Andy, like money. You had money in the bank. If they could have just gotten past
Aren't you happier, though, that your heart got ripped out on that this week, or like this last week, than this week coming up?
My heart is intact. It's perfectly fine. Where my heart almost was ripped out was watching Oklahoma State give up a 51-14 lead to Central Michigan in the second half, while a young back seven, or inexperienced back seven in various cases. Look, there were signs of it early, and Central Michigan didn't take advantage of it. And then they went into the locker room, and Central Michigan comes out in the second half of Oklahoma State CMU, and Central Michigan realized what they could do, and they took advantage of a back seven that is young and inexperienced, and they threw everything at them, and they could not do much to stop it. And I think for OSU, if you're an OSU fan, you feel good that you still got a double-digit win. You won by 14 points, even though you gave up quite a bit in the second half. You know that there's going to be a lot of tape and a lot of things to work on for Oklahoma State moving in the next few weeks. And you've got 3 weeks before you open conference play on the road at Baylor. You get Arizona State this week coming up. We'll talk about that in a bit, as I said. And then you've got University of Arkansas, Pennsylvania, or Pine Bluff, UAPB, FCS school. So don't know enough about ASU to have a fair judgment on that game. But you got a lot of work to do. Derek Mason's got some work to do. But, man, I said all off season, for Oklahoma State to have a good year this year, their offense is going to have to make up for whatever they lose on defense. I know they didn't score much in the second half. They took their foot off the gas offensively. Even though they kept the starters out there, you could tell they took their foot off the gas. But the reason they kept the starters out there was Mike Gundy was watching the defense going, hey, we may not want to just bring in. They tried to bring in the second unit. Gunnar Gundy got his 3 snaps. And then he was back on the bench, so that was a nice moment for him. But Sam, Oklahoma State got the win, starts 1-0. It was a little bit dicier than we expected in the second half. I mean, how do you feel about Oklahoma State after week 1?
Yeah, certainly the way it finished is concerning. And so it brings me to this question. Under Jim Knowles and what they did last year defensively, to me, it felt like Oklahoma State changed the way it won football. So remember when we used to be Mike Gundy and 10 personnel and score 60 points all the time and win these shootouts like this? This is what that felt like. So the question to me is this an aberration? And they're going to go back and they're going to regroup and get better defensively? Or are we going to get back to playing like that? This is how this team is going to have to win? And kudos to Spencer Sanders. He looked great. The receivers look great. They threw it all over the yard. But that to me is the question coming out of this game is this an aberration just because it was week 1, or is this a sign of a trend that we're going to have to watch out?
Yeah, I mean, and really, I think this is again, kind of that same point, right? I don't really know what to take from this one, but I think what was pretty clear, in following that one towards the end was that they did. Like, you talk about how you don't want to pull players out because you don't want to have to try to then put them back in. You can kind of say the same thing about, you don't really, especially with an offense like Oklahoma State's, which is so much about building that momentum and keeping everything running that way. When you take your foot off the gas, it gets really hard to just ramp it back up when you need it. And the fact that Central Michigan started to make that comeback, like what I saw going back and looking at the end of that game, it just looked like Oklahoma State, when they were trying to ramp it back up, they just couldn't get it going again. And so ideally, they're not going to have to worry about that in the Big 12. But I think there's enough Big 12 teams here that if they start to get going late, can really start to snowball things. So Oklahoma State is going to have to be, I think they're going to be the most susceptible to a big upset when they get up really big, go into half, and then come out at halftime and kind of take their foot off the gas here, because there's a lot of Big 12 teams, I think, that can get going pretty quickly. And I just don't know that Oklahoma State's defense is going to have enough to completely stop them in their tracks and to give their offense time to ramp it back up. So still have to feel really good about what Oklahoma State can do this year. But if you're looking for a reason to be worried about any one particular game, it's going to be a situation where they take their foot off of the gas offensively in the second half and then have to turn it back on and just can't get it going.
Shout out to Feels Like 45, our Oklahoma State podcast here in the network. They put 2 great threads, one offensive, one defensive, out on Twitter. If you're not following them, go and do so. Shouts to Kate and Dustin for the work they do. But one thing they noted on defense, 24 defensive players saw at least 9 snaps in that game. They rotated a lot of guys in and out. This is a young and an inexperienced back seven in your DBs and your linebackers. There's concerns at linebacker for sure, but you don't replace Malcolm Rodriguez and Devin Harper easily. You just don't. No, you don't. Unless you're Alabama and you replace everybody easily, and you can't hold anybody else to that standard. Maybe Georgia. That's just unfair. Very excited to see what Oklahoma State does moving forward. TCU going on the road to Colorado. Late start. I'm going to be honest. This game got going late. As I mentioned, I have a small child, a baby. I have 3 kids, 3 and under. If you are a first-time listener to the show and weren't aware of that, if you're a long-time listener to the show, you know this already. So I cannot say that I stayed up to watch all this TCU game. I watched as much as I could. I did. The kids, the 3-month-old still sleeping in our room. So, that's not lying. So I was watching on my phone till... I'm going to say this. From what I watched and what I looked at, I can't make a bold statement on this game because, again, I have not watched all the second half. I know that they have decided that Chad Morris is their starting quarterback. I'm not sure they should make that decision just yet. I think there still might be a quarterback controversy in Fort Worth because I don't feel like he absolutely won this job. Thank goodness the TCU rushing game was as good as it was, compiling 275 yards on the ground against a bad Colorado team for a nice 38-13 comfortable win. And TCU should have you got SMU coming up in a few weeks, and that's a game you definitely don't want to lose this year of all years. If ever there was a year not to lose to SMU, it's this year. But for TCU, Sam, I'm curious, our Texpert here, do you feel like there's still a quarterback controversy at TCU? And what was your takeaway overall of the Horned Frogs' performance in Boulder?
I think they got a couple guys that can win with at quarterback for sure. Like Chandler was a little rough early. He started to get in the groove later. The injury took him out, which was a little frustrating. We'll have to see how that ends up, how long that holds him out. But Duggan can still get it done. He obviously can get it done on the ground as he always has. And Sam Jackson was really electrifying when he came in. And I, like you, I have 2 children. Mine are a little bit older. One's 7, one's 2. But I was struggling in that one too, but I made it. And because I got my warm up in week 0 for that North Texas UTEP 9 o'clock kick. And I fell asleep a little bit in the fourth quarter of that one. So I already got my reps under me. So I was ready, and it was hard, but I stayed up for the whole thing. First, I'll say this is Colorado's not very good. That is a bad football team that TCU beat. But, and as rough as TCU looked early, the biggest things were, like the quarterback, I think they're fine with any of those guys. I think they all have some special ability and some potential. Get the ball to Quentin Johnston. And I thought they struggled with that early. And then eventually you saw Garrett Riley start calling some reverses and some short passes, swing passes, get the ball to him. That's important. Running game picked up. And then defensively, I really was impressed how fast they played, because this is their first time playing in something that is not Gary Patterson's 4-2-5 in their careers. So I was really impressed with how quickly they picked up Joe Gillespie's system, how fast they played. They ran to the ball. There wasn't a lot of sloppy tackling. Overall, they're very, very sound defensively. So I think a lot to like. Definitely not perfect, because, like I said, that you could see a lot of the struggles and kinks in the first half that need to be worked out. But overall, fairly good win. It's just see how the quarterback situation plays out and how Chandler's health ends up being. But I think they've got enough guys to win for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really do much but echo what you were saying, because Colorado is a bad defensive team across the board. Like, it was great that your running game went absolutely ballistic here, but to have the struggles that you did trying to throw the ball, that has to be a warning sign. Again, it's not a panic. Like, don't panic about it. But the fact that you played a team in Colorado who is projected to have as bad of a pass defense as they have, or as they are projected this year, that is a game that you should have at least been able to get something going. To not have any touchdowns. Sure, you didn't throw a pick, but you really didn't do a lot in that passing game anyway, because the running game was so dominant. But there were plenty of times from what I saw. Again, I didn't actually get to watch most of this game because it's kind of hard to watch another game when you're in a press box. But, like, and I haven't had an opportunity to go back and watch the rest of it, but I'm definitely interested to, because everything, it seemed to me from everything I saw, they were trying to throw the ball. It wasn't a case where the running game was so dominant that they just decided we're just going to run and that's all we're going to do, and they can't even stop it. Like, they were running quite a bit, yes, and it was being very successful, but they were still trying to throw the ball, and it just wasn't working. And so, like, again, if you're looking for a reason to be worried, that's the reason to be worried. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to get the offense through the air, because once we get into conference play, there are so many really good running teams that every single team is going to be prepared in some fashion for a good running team, especially when you get towards the end of the year. Because literally, you go up and down the entire Big 12, conference. I'm having a hard time finding a team that does not or is not expected to have a really good running game this year. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they can hold up over the course of the year. And they're going to have to find a way to develop a quarterback in season to be able to get that passing game going, because the running game is not going to be able to carry them the entire season.
One thing that can carry you all season long is the incredibly comfortable t-shirts, sweaters, and hoodies that you can get at Home Field Apparel, the home of the best vintage college sports apparel you will find anywhere. And of course, now, if say you want those incredibly comfortable shirts and sweaters and hoodies and you don't want to have a logo on them, I guess that's something you could do. They do have the core collection, which is just their incredibly comfortable gear. Home Field's been a sponsor on this show and this network for quite some time. I don't know that I can buy something without a logo, because the logos are too good. They're too good for every school that's on there. And of course, every Big 12 school is available on Home Field Apparel. If you didn't know, that is current and future. I wore my TCU shirt on Saturday, so I felt right. It felt right. It's the really cool one. I have 2 shirts of vintage logos wearing large fur coats. I believe there's actually only one more on Home Field that I don't own. Christmas is coming. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, poke, poke, wink, wink, wife who doesn't listen to this podcast, but that's okay. I'll just tell her. She'll be aware. Like I said, every Big 12 school on there, and you can start your collection with promo code NETWORK12, NETWORK12 for 15% off your first purchase. I do follow the good brand on Twitter, as you all should be doing. They are going to be releasing shirts for like national championship teams this week. So if your team has won a national championship, as an OSU plan, please don't put one out for that 1945 thing that they decided to hang in the stadium. I don't really want that. But Oklahoma, Texas, you could probably get one for football. Is it? I don't know if it's just football. I assume it's football because it's for football season. Oklahoma, Texas. Does BYU have one from like the 30s? I'm gonna go do some research. I should probably start doing that before those schools get here. Now I'm really curious if like Cincinnati and BYU have.
BYU has one, but I don't remember what year it is. But yes, it's from a while back when they got voted as the champion in the poll.
God, I hope they put one out for UCF just for the laughs, just for Twitter, just because amazing. UCF fans would buy that thing. They'd buy out of stock. They'd be so busy. And the it best would just part, be gold.
All they have to do is put a tiny little asterisk there so that everybody that wants to complain about it can complain about it and say, hey, look, it's there, but make it so small that even UCF fans wouldn't really care that much about it.
Oh, so good. So if that happens, you all should be paying attention to the good brand on Twitter at Homefield Apparel. Homefield Apparel, Network 12, 15% off your first order. Be rocking the most comfortable vintage college sports apparel this football season.
I'm Sam, and I co-host the Scott and Holm podcast, the known universe's first Houston Cougar sports podcast. Every week, even during the offseason, my co-host Dustin and I come on and talk everything current as it relates to the Cougs, and every so often, we'll bring on UH luminaries like Carl Lewis, Kellen Sampson, and a number of other fantastic Cougar voices. And as proud members of the 1012 Network, we also find the time to talk about our future conference and future opponents in the Big 12 as well. If all of that sounds even a little bit interesting to you, we would love it if you subscribe to the Scott Holm podcast on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere else you put podcasts in your ears. That's podcast spelled P-A-W-D cast, because the two of us hosting the show are nothing if not big dorks. So thank you, and go Cougs.
Boom! Bosco's Boys is here. I think we all wanted it, and the marriage is officially official. I'm so pumped to bring my show to the 1012 Network, Bosco's Boys, the most consistent K-State podcast out there. Over 4 years, with at least one episode a week. Bringing live shows to the listeners and to the participants every Wednesday at 7 p.m. I'm pumped to be here, and I would love it if you guys came over to Bosco's Boys and gave us a listen. Because we are not Big J Journos. This is a podcast by a fan and his dog for fellow K-State and Big 12 fans. And I can't wait to chop it up with all the members and fans of the 1012 Network.
All right, we had a lot of blowouts on Saturday. A lot of Big 12 teams blowing out opponents. Only one really stood out to me, but we'll try and touch on a few of them. Andy, Kansas blew out an FCS team. And for those of you saying, who cares, let me restate that slowly so that you can allow it a moment to process through your brains. Kansas, the University of, in a football game, blew out an FCS team. Kansas doesn't blow out anybody. They blew out an FCS team. And you can say that doesn't mean anything. And what that tells me is this might be the first time in more than a decade that losing to Kansas will not be a meme. It'll just be a loss on your record. Kansas, Andy, as our Kansas guru here, buddy, I'm going to give you the floor for a whole 60 seconds to say whatever you want about Kansas trouncing Tennessee Tech.
Only 60 seconds? Okay, look, you stole my thunder a little bit, because over on Blue Wings Rising today, we actually had our editor over there, Kyle Davis, wrote an article talking about the last 10 games, right, that Kansas had against FCS opponents. The record isn't really that great at all, and they're really, really close wins when they do win. So the fact that they blew them out in this game is absolutely phenomenal. It's a huge positive sign. I said going into this game that I could see one of two things happening. Either Kansas was going to win big because they were going to keep the starters in the entire game, and they were just going to run up and down to try to get as much positive momentum as possible going into West Virginia, or they were going to play as many good players as they possibly could, and it was probably going to be at best a 3-score game. Like, I thought it was an either or. Instead, what we got both. We got them playing tons of people in the first half, all up and down both sides of the ball. We had 7 different players score a touchdown in this game, which is absolutely ridiculous. They had 5 rushing touchdowns. Running back is by far, I think, the deepest room for the entire team this year. Their running back core is going to be phenomenal this year. It will be interesting to see how they stack up against everyone else, because I think Kansas has the most options that could potentially play significant minutes. They may not have all the best options, but they have the most options up and down the entire room. But the fact that they did this, with only a couple minor mistakes, Lonnie Phelps, you look at his Pro Football Focus grade from this week, is absolutely phenomenal. Like, the fact that Kansas is doing great things on both sides of the ball. And again, yes, you can say FCS team, and honestly, it's a pretty bad FCS team at that. But to win by 46 points, again, this is not something we've seen Kansas do in a really, really long time. That gets them back to you're doing what you're supposed to do against bad teams. Like, both Kansas having a great season for Kansas and Kansas having an okay good season both required you to have a pretty convincing win in this game. The fact that they did it the way they did now opens up tons of possibilities. It's no longer impossible to see Kansas actually having a good year.
Yeah, I think to Andy's point, and I didn't get to very much of this, but I will say I am encouraged that you beat down a team that you're supposed to in the way that you're supposed to beat them down. I was just going back to look, when's the last time they won a game by 40-plus points? and the latest one I found was September 15th, 2018. They beat Rutgers 55-14, which I guess at that time Rutgers was close to an FCS team. But it's
that was long called, like that was anticipated as the toilet bowl of the century. Like it was expected to be a really bad game, and Kansas jumped on them early and rode to a gigantic win. So that was just as surprising, I think.
But we're talking 4 years. So it's been 4 years since they've won a game by 40 points, and I think we saw signs of this last year. Was, of course, obviously they beat Texas. Everybody wants to make fun of that, but they went in there and that was a back and forth game. And then, of course, they came very, very close to beating Oklahoma. The progress that they made in year one under Leipold was clear. And the question is, okay, can you build upon it? And so this is a good first sign. And then we get to see, obviously, with West Virginia, what do we see as we get into West Virginia? And that'll be another sign of, okay, how much more improvement are we seeing? But it is an encouraging sign, to say the least, for the Jayhawks. And hey, kudos for them and their fans, because they've been through a lot.
Yeah, and to your point about beating Texas, like that, and that shouldn't necessarily be a meme moving forward. Like that was them catching Texas at exactly the right time. But this is nowhere near the meme potential that 2016 was, right? When they beat them, I said at that time, it was like, this is either going to be the only highlight of David Beatty's time at Kansas, which it was, or it's going to be the start of the turnaround. It's one or the other. There's no way it's anywhere in the middle. You could say the exact same thing about this last one, except this one felt like last year, that game against Texas was the start of the turnaround. The question, obviously, is how long does it take that turnaround? But we're going to be looking back on this. You're going to have 2 Kansas wins over Texas. One is an absolute joke that everybody can make fun of for the longest time. I think we're going to get to a point where if people remember last year's victory of Kansas over Texas, it's going to be remembering it as the start of when Leipold got it turned around, and not as the, oh my gosh, Kansas beat Texas, everybody laugh at them.
And the next 2 games at West Virginia, and then they have Houston after that, which I've kept saying, and I live down here, that's my alma mater, University of Houston, is I've told people don't sleep on that one. Should Houston win that one? Probably. But I don't know, especially after what we saw in Houston's over against UTSA, and we'll get to that. But Kansas has a chance here to make some real noise here in September. And it's kind of amazing that we're sitting here saying that.
So, Sam, you mentioned Houston. Oh man, look, I have nothing but respect for UTSA. That is my G5 team with Tulsa, because I grew up in Tulsa. But UTSA, meet me, it's so much fun. That game was significantly closer than it should have been, and Houston feels a little lucky with some things that kind of went their way to have even been in a spot to go into overtime and win that game in the end. I was really high on Houston coming into the season. Their schedule's not daunting, but again, you don't want to read in too much into week one, but I'm feeling less confident about Houston now sitting here than I was heading into the weekend.
I would agree. And they get Texas Tech this weekend, and that's going to be another big litmus test. They go on the road to Lubbock, which, by the way, they didn't beat them last year when they hosted them in their NRG Stadium in a game they were up 14-0 in a hurry. The one thing that had concerned me about Houston coming into this year, and I heard a lot of people talking about them possibly running the table, being a dark horse playoff team and stuff like that, which I don't think their schedule is built to get them there. But the one question I had, and the one bugaboo for them to me, was the absence of Alton McCaskey. He was such a dynamic guy for them last year as a freshman, 16 touchdowns. And he just adds a different element to that offense. And him going down with that knee injury in the spring, I just wondered, are they going to be able to get the same punch in the backfield? And they were not. They definitely struggled to run the ball when they tried to force the issue early in the first half. And then things started to turn around in the second half when they started throwing the ball a little bit more. But they were on the ropes, buddy. I mean, they failed a 4th and 1 in the third quarter, down 21-7. That if UTSA does not have 12 men on the field, it gives Houston a first down, it doesn't extend that drive. Who knows what happens after that? Who knows if we even get to it? And so, kudos to Houston, because they took advantage of that. They scored 2 straight scores. Derek Parrish with a great rush that turned into an interception, and then we got a instant classic finish with Clayton Tune and Frank Harris dueling it out. But I would agree. Houston has a lot of things to work out, and it's going to be really interesting these next 2 weeks with Tech and Kansas coming up on to see how they smooth some of that out.
Yeah, I mean, think of the other play, that the refs messed up that theoretically could have made it so we didn't have overtime. The timing play when they went back and saw, elbow down way behind the line of scrimmage, let it run off an extra 20 seconds, and then they wound the clock again. Like, there was a lot of stuff, and, UTSA got down really close to the end zone as well and ended up kicking a field goal to send it into overtime. But if they had another 20 seconds, they might have had an opportunity to actually punch it in the end zone. I actually previewed Houston with Sam and Dustin over in the Scott and Holman podcast here on the network. And they actually, I was a little surprised when they said this, but they said that looking at the schedule for Houston, their toughest 3-game stretch is the first 3 games of the season because they missed basically everybody in Conference USA this year in the actual regular season schedule. And so UTSA was a team that they had tabbed as they could be sneaky good this year. This could be a team that they're not necessarily ready for. And especially if Houston has to take some time to ramp up to where they're going to be for the season, like that could be a problem. Then going to Lubbock and, I don't know if they were just pandering to me because they were on my podcast, but talking about how, that is not necessarily a gimme game. They were talking about like Leipold and all of that stuff, being there and how Kansas is getting better. You don't know if it's going to be a gimme game by that point. But I think we saw from the first week of the season, like that is not one that you can immediately pencil in as a win. It should still be a win, I would say. But like, you can't look at that one and say, oh, absolutely, there's no way they're losing that game. And so, yeah, this is like the toughest 3-game stretch for them of the entire year. If they can come out of this 3-game stretch 3-0, then you feel really good about the momentum that they can build. But I would not be shocked if they lose next week at Texas Tech. And then if they're in a dogfight with Kansas the week after that. So, like, this is going to be a really tough next 2 weeks for them. We'll see how well they can get out of it.
Cincinnati replacing a ton. And I want to give them props because, look, they went into an Arkansas team that who knows where they finish in the SEC West, but that's a well-coached and good team with a really good quarterback. Cincinnati does not get the win, but I have a hard time not coming away from that game, at least feeling pretty good about Cincinnati. If your goals for them are to win the AAC again and go to a potentially New Year's Six bowl, go to a nice bowl game this year, they're not going to make it back to the playoff. But for Cincinnati, with everything they've replaced, to play Arkansas as tough as they did, which did not hit that under, went over by half a point, stupid second half scoring. I felt good about the idea that Cincinnati is going to have to replace pieces. But I think we say either like reloading or rebuilding. I think replacing needs to be in there as well. Because I don't think it's the same as reloading. But I think you have to replace some pieces. It's not a reload where you just automatically put everything back in and you're ready to go. And it's not a full rebuild where you're having to start over from scratch and get it back to where you were. I think replacing is a good middle term in between those two. And I think that's where Cincinnati is they've got to replace those pieces, and they're going to work on doing that. In the meantime, this is still a really good football team that's going to be very competitive and have a legitimate shot to defend their title in the AAC this year.
No, 100%. I think this is such a huge year because this is where you can, especially coming into the Big 12, and I think Houston's in the same spot. You want to be able to build that foundation coming into the league. You're elevating. They have been recruiting at a high level. We saw it in the draft. We saw it with the roster last year. And you've got to follow up that run with, like you said, another run to the conference championship. If you can get back into the game, if you can get back and win the conference, it's a huge first step. And being as competitive on the road against a good SEC team, I think is a great sign for the Bearcats.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really what it was, right? Like last year, Arkansas was a team that was on the rise throughout the entire year. They played in an absolutely hellacious SEC division last year, so they weren't able to finish as strong as they would like, but there was a lot of big expectations for both of these teams coming into the year. And for Cincinnati to be down 14-0 at half and be able to still, maintain their momentum in that game, like get back into that game and make it an actual game that was worth watching by the end. Like, I think you have to give them a ton of props. They went on the road to a really tough place, and they did a really good job, I think, of overcoming some adversity and just not quite having enough to come all the way back.
Plenty of blowouts in the Big 12 this weekend. Oklahoma over UTEP 45-13. Iowa State over SEMO 42-10. Baylor over Albany 69-10. Kansas State 34. South Dakota 0. Texas Tech 63. Murray State 10. And Texas over Louisiana Monroe 52-10. All right, guys. What do you think was the blowout that you can actually take something away from?
I'll start with the one I was at. I was at Texas and Louisiana Monroe, and I took away some interesting stuff because I wasn't sure what to expect. They start 2 freshman offensive linemen. Quinn Ewers is making his first start since he was at South Lake Carroll in 2020. You have no idea what some of these defenders are going to look like as they've moved around some pieces there too. And I don't come away thinking they're in any better position to beat Alabama than I did before the season. But I do see some promise in that roster moving forward throughout the rest of the season, especially with Ewers. He didn't blow anybody away, but I don't know that we needed to expect him to blow anybody away last night. I thought you want to see him hit some deep balls a little bit better, but overall, the way he responded to a really disastrous start where he threw a pick on the second play was really poorly forced ball into traffic. I was interested to see how poised he was after that. He made a lot of third and fourth down conversions the rest of the way and seemed to have some poise that I don't think I knew about him coming in. So I certainly took a lot away from that one. But yeah, I think they're going to run into a buzzsaw against Alabama, and then it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to that in the weeks following, where they have UTSA and Texas Tech after the tie.
Yeah, for me, I think it actually has to be that Texas Tech game against Murray State. Look, I mean, all the other ones were completely expected. Like, I didn't see, like, I heard a lot of OU fans talking about, oh my gosh, look how fantastic Dylan Gabriel was. Like, I didn't see anything well past the expectation or something that immediately made me think, oh, he has a, you know, conference player of the year type of performance already or anything like that. Texas Tech was the team of that group that I was the most intrigued about what they're actually going to be this year, right? Like, you can talk about how important it was to see Kansas, you know, have that huge blowout that they did. I think it was just as important for Texas Tech. You know, brand new Joey McGuire head coach, trying to figure out who the quarterback is going to be, like all of this stuff that they have, all the questions that they have, trying to figure out what their identity is going to be this year with the first year under a new head coach. But I think the most interesting question for me as well, coming out of that game, is who should Texas Tech's quarterback be moving forward? Because I think both, you know, Shuck and Smith played really well in these games. Smith ended up being the leading passer for Texas Tech there. So, like, I think that there was a lot of questions now to be answered for Texas Tech, but the fact that they had 2 guys that played well enough to both be in the conversation because of how well they played, not because of both of them were just awful, that brings up a lot of questions for Texas Tech, but I think it also can give you a little bit of, I guess, comfort if you're a Texas Tech fan to realize that they're still getting the big wins that they should be getting, even with all the questions surrounding the team this year.
One thing real quick, I'll interject there, Andy. According to my good friend Mike Craven over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, speaking of Tyler Shuck, apparently he suffered an injury in that game and could be out the next 2 weeks. So we could be
I hadn't seen that. Yeah. That would explain why Smith had such a good game, or had the opportunity to have such a good game. I didn't realize he had actually injured.
And that just came down probably about an hour ago. So okay. At least according to the timestamp on Craven's story. But that obviously turns it into Donovan Smith's show for the immediate future. And then we may see some Baron Morton as well. But yeah, it is. That's going to be an interesting dynamic and a tough break, obviously, for Shuck, who obviously missed a lot of last season after breaking the collarbone. But it is, like I said, like I was saying earlier with Houston, that game to me this weekend is going to be so fascinating because I think we're going to learn a lot about those 2 teams.
Yeah, unfortunately, that continues the string like I was talking about. I was talking with Albie Shores, like, can Texas Tech keep their quarterback healthy this year? And unfortunately, it sounds like that's not the case. So hopefully it's only a couple weeks and he can come back and then they can actually have a proper, evaluation of who the quarterback should be moving forward. But, man, I want to know what it is that Texas Tech has going on down there that they can't seem to keep a quarterback healthy.
I hate that it happened this way, but I've been on the Donovan Smith train all off season, so I'm happy to see it leaving the station, though I would prefer it for other reasons than injury. I'll say this for 2. Kansas State, nice win. I think South Dakota was the best FCS team anybody in the Big 12 was going to be facing this season. Look, they got up 20-0 in the first quarter, 27-0 at half, and just coasted to the end, so don't let them only scoring 34 points on South Dakota make you go like, well, it's not that impressive. It was. They literally did not try to worry about much the rest of the game. Iowa State 42, SEMO, Southeast Missouri State 10. Look, Iowa State, and I listened to Jamie and Eric over on the Cyclone Family Podcast, our Iowa State show here in the network, talk about one of the things they wanted to see this weekend was Iowa State not playing with its food and just soundly beating an FCS opponent, which, look, Iowa State under Matt Campbell, week 1, Blowouts don't happen often. We've seen them struggle with FCS teams, need overtime to beat them, even if it's Northern Iowa or whatever, on a pretty regular basis. See them go out and blow somebody out, an FCS opponent, in week 1 with as much as they had to replace in the offseason under this new team. I don't know if it means anything for next week, but it is a positive sign and something as an Iowa State fan, I'm sure happy to see not have a struggle in week 1, which leads me to how we're going to wrap this show looking ahead to the week ahead. Iowa State fans, as far as I can tell, as long as you guys don't give up a safety, you should finally be able to beat the Iowa Hawkeyes this coming weekend. The only way, because if you don't understand, Iowa beat whatever FCT, I think it was South Dakota State, it was the other South Dakota, beat them 7-3 and didn't score a touchdown. There's a tweet from a brewery who are going to give out free Jell-O shots for every touchdown scored by Iowa. They're going to save all of those for next week. But the real joke is, the only way that could have been a more Iowa game is if Iowa State, or if Iowa had not actually kicked the field goal. 4-3 sounds like an Iowa win. I don't know about you guys. That's the most Iowa thing ever. It's just, how many Iowa jokes
Honestly,
can we make?
4-3 sounds like a Big Ten basketball game. So,
guys, I will tell you, I tried, because I saw all the talk on Twitter about this game, and I tuned in the fourth quarter for like 3 possessions, and I couldn't do it. I saw 3 possessions. I saw 3 punts, and I checked out. I was like, guys, bless y'all that are having fun with this, but I just can't. I cannot.
Fun on Twitter is not fun on watching the game.
Right. No. I was thoroughly enjoying it with some good friends who are Iowa State fans. Actually, I think the funniest thing to come out of the entire weekend was good friends over at Wide Right Natty Light wrote and yes, they had to put in the deck for the article, this is satire, that means it's not real. Said that they they made a change at starting quarterback and named the punter their starting quarterback because, of course, everything can go wrong if you try to throw the ball on first down. Instead, we just punt it and let the defense score.
It's beautiful. It's great. Can Iowa State finally beat Iowa? I don't know, but it is one of the games in an absolutely loaded week 2 for the Big 12. Let me just, and I'm sorry, week 1, love to see Big 12 football back. We saw a ton of blowouts on Saturday, a bunch of FCS games. Week 2, I mean, it's the difference between watching Iowa, South Dakota and watching North Carolina, App State, okay? Quality versus and fun football versus, I don't think Iowa fans even enjoy them. They might have. They're a weird freaking bunch. Let's go through this slate. We've got the Cy Hawk Trophy back again, Iowa State. We've got Oklahoma State, Arizona State, Alabama, Texas, Kansas State, Missouri, Texas Tech, Houston, games we've mentioned, West Virginia, Kansas, Baylor, BYU, and then we've got Oklahoma, Kent State, and TCU, Tarleton. All right, Andy, and hold on. I'm so sorry.
I'll say you missed Oklahoma State, Arizona State?
No, I mentioned it. What I forgot to do,
then I missed it.
Let's see, is check. I forgot. UCF will be playing Louisville. Ooh, there's a weak one. And Cincinnati's got Kennesaw State. We'll set that one aside. All right. You cannot pick the school that you root for. So, Sam, you can't pick Houston, Texas Tech. Andy, you can't pick Kansas. I can't pick OSU, Arizona State. That's fine. What game in the Big 12 for week 2, and we do include the 4 incoming schools, as we said in the intro, are you most excited for, most intrigued to see, have the biggest question you want answered from? Whatever way you want to go with it. What's one game you are absolutely cannot miss this coming weekend?
I'm going to go Baylor BYU. That's the one. I've kind of had that circled all off season because to me, when I look at Baylor and I saw what they brought back on the line of scrimmage up front on the offensive line and that entire 2 deep on the defensive line and Addy Jackson player, I picked them as my Big 12 favorite. However, I have to acknowledge that when you lose some of the guys they've lost, 2 starting receivers, Jalen Petrie, Terrell Bernard, most of that back end of the defense, there's going to be some growing pains. And to me, this game, going on the road to Provo against a BYU team that wants this one badly after going to Waco and getting whooped last year, if they can go in there and win that game, then Baylor, to me, solidifies themselves as a big, legitimate Big 12 title contender again, that they're built to go do that. If they don't, maybe there's a few more growing pains in store for this team as we go through the season. But to me, this is a huge litmus test game for Baylor. So I'm fascinated to see. It's a late kickoff, 9:15 Central. on Saturday night. So we'll be up late for this one. And of course, the Jeff Grimes storyline. Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator at Baylor, of course, was at BYU before. He took that job. So there's a lot of familiarity on the sidelines between these two staffs. So lots of intrigue in this one. So I'm fascinated by that one.
Yeah, I knew you were going to take that one. I mean, it's the obvious one. But, Philip, we actually failed to talk about what BYU did this last week, right? They played a USF team, which is not going to be a very good team this year. But I think they're better than any of the FCS opponents that anyone else in the Big 12 or coming into the Big 12 played. They were up 38-0, okay, before USF even did anything, and then took their foot off the gas and still won by a ton. This BYU team, I think a lot of people are sleeping on. I think they're a lot better than most people actually think that they are. And so whoever wins that game is going to get a huge feather in their cap. If it's BYU getting that big win against Baylor and vaulting themselves way up in terms of the way people are perceiving them, or Baylor goes on the road in a really tough environment. I don't think BYU is getting the credit it deserves. But instead of just picking the exact same one again, the other one I'm really interested in, look, Iowa State and Iowa, it gets called El Assico for a reason because I think it's going to be a super ugly, a really, really ugly game. The one I'm actually really interested in is Missouri and Kansas State. And not just because they are both, rivals of the Jayhawks, but mainly because, this is a Missouri team. There's a lot of Missouri fans, and being in the Kansas City area, I get to hear from a lot of them all the time who are really excited about their team this year. Kansas State is one of those teams that I am wondering, what they're going to be this year. And so they need, I think, to have a big win here to build that momentum. If you win, you win. That's great. But it being at home, the expectations that this Kansas State team has on them, they need to have a strong performance in this one. So I will be interested to see how much they can win this one by. I do think that they're going to go ahead and win it. They're favored by 8.5 as of right now when we're recording this. So, this is one that they should win. They should win fairly handily, I think. But I think it's the one that we can either have the most new questions come up about them if they don't take care of business, or we can get a lot of questions about this team answered in this particular game.
Yeah, look, Andy, to your point, Missouri knocked off Louisiana Tech in week 1, 52-24, which is better than I expected from them. I still don't have high expectations for Missouri this year. I'll probably pick Kansas. I'm going to pick Kansas State to win that game. We'll see about the spread on Thursday. Sam, BYU Baylor is our game of the week this week in the Big 12 as far as I'm concerned. I know game days can be at Texas, Alabama. That is a name game, and that is it. Sorry, it's a 20-point spread now on Alabama. Yeah.
I don't like I said. I kind of said it earlier. I don't think it's going to be that close, but I am intrigued by it because I am intrigued to see what does Texas look like. How do they handle it? How do they handle what the buzzsaw that's coming for them? And I think we'll learn something from that. But yeah, that's I don't think that's going to be free. We know how that one's going.
Alabama,
right?
Is bigger...
The real question is it going to be Texas losing to Arkansas bad, or is it going to be what are they even playing? Is Texas even showing up on the field? No, I was honestly though, you can make an argument that there's only really 2 Big 12 games this week, because Houston and Texas Tech are playing each other, future members of the Big 12, and then Kansas, West Virginia, and we somehow did not pick a single Big 12 against Big 12 game.
Well, Baylor and BYU.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. Sorry. Third one. Wow. What am I doing?
Come on, man.
I lose.
You got to get up to this. By the way, Alabama is over Texas is a bigger spread than West Virginia, Kansas, in case everybody.
Wow.
Alabama is a 20-point favorite over Texas. West Virginia is a 13-point favorite over Kansas. It is a touchdown difference in the spread. That is a lot of respect for Kansas. That is probably due after they try to Tennessee Tech. I will say this. Houston, Texas Tech is really interesting. Especially after how Houston looked week 1 against UTSA. I had much higher expectations for them in that game. Now we know that Tyler Shuck is out. The Donovan Smith train is leaving the station for Texas Tech. That changes things a little bit. I'm super excited about Texas Tech, NC State after NC State's performance because they should have lost to East Carolina if East Carolina could make a kick, period. Oh man. East Carolina. I'm really intrigued by Texas Tech because, look, haven't had super high expectations for year 1. In large part of that was because of the way their schedule started the first 6 weeks of the season. With how Houston looked in week 1 and how NC State looked in week 1. And again, we don't want to overread in week 1. if you're Texas Tech, it may not be as daunting as we thought heading into the season. You could be setting yourself up for a much better year than we thought. So I will definitely be keeping an eye on Texas Tech Houston. I was already excited for that one, but I'm even more so now. Also not wanting to echo what everybody else said because I don't want to say the same games. But yeah, Baylor BYU, it's the game of the week. I'm sorry. It is the Big 12 game of the week. I am super interested in that. Yes, it's a 9:15 God's time kickoff. Just get used to it, folks. We're going to get one pretty much every other week with BYU in the conference now. It's just going to be part of it. You got to have that late night window. It's valuable. Okay. It's like ESPN Plus. You don't have to like it, but there's value to it and we want money. So just suck it up, get your subscription, watch your FCS game on it and all the other women's and men's Olympic sports that are going to be on it. And you know what? I love it because I want to watch all the Oklahoma State women's softball games and soccer games. Soccer going on right now. It's Sunday. I have not checked the scoreboard to see how everybody's doing. I was going to do that, but again, small child. Wife not thrilled that I'm doing a podcast on Sunday night of Labor Day weekend. That's not a shot at her. She's amazing because I'm still doing it, sitting here in a closet, sweating profusely, just like I was back in high school with a test tomorrow morning. So this feels like a good exit point for us. Sam, thank you. You have been even better than I could have expected, which is pretty high because I listen to you on the podcast with Max Olson. I read your work. You are the Texpert. That is not a nickname that is given out by people lightly. Do me a favor. Plug it all. Everywhere everyone can find anything and all the things that you do, whether it's sports coverage, cooking show, I don't care. Hit it.
I wish I had a cooking show, but I love to cook. TheAthletic.com, go to our college football page. We've got a fantastic college football team. Privileged to be a part of it. We got so many superb writers. And you'll find all our work there. And then our main podcast feed, the flagship podcast feed, is the Andy Staples Show and Friends feed. We got 8 shows there a week during the season. Andy and Ari Wasserman, of course, host a few of them. Nicole Auerbach hosts Power Hour. Me and Max Olson have our own pod in the middle of the week. We have an SEC podcast. We have everything you want is in there. Obviously, Max and I do have a large Big 12 flavor in our podcast because we cover that ground quite a bit. So appreciate you guys having me on. Really enjoyed it. Big fans of you guys as well. And keep up the great work.
Appreciate it. Have you guys come up with a new name for your show yet?
No, we're working on that. Right now. We're just kind of rolling nameless. We're trying not to force it and see if we can get it to come up organically. I have some ideas though.
We're not going to use 1412, so that's available.
No, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Andy, of course, is the host of the Rock Chalk podcast, part of the 1012 Network. Do not forget to listen to every show of the 1012 Network at 1012network.com. But that's not the only thing Andy does cover in Kansas. Andy, plug away.
Yeah, so you can follow me personally at Andy Mitts 12 on Twitter. Obviously, the podcast is at Rock Chalk Pod. I also write, or I'm the publisher over at Blue Wings Rising, the SI Fan Nation site that covers the Jayhawks. And you can find that at Blue Wings Rise on Twitter, and then it's www.bluewingsrising.com.
Of course, like I said, 1012 podcast, flagship show of the 1012 Network. We are, I don't remember how many shows now. We got a lot of shows. The only shows we don't have are TCU, BYU, and Cincinnati. I'm working on it. I promise. Working diligently.
Right. So we technically have 13 shows, but one of them is still looking for a new new host.
So if you're a Big 12 basketball fan and want to take over the Midwest Madness, our Twitter DMs are open at 1012 Network. Our Instagram DMs are open at 1012 Pod. Our Gmail is up and running, 1012podcast@gmail.com. And of course, you can visit 1012network.com, TEN the number 12, the word network, and find every show in the network. Go check it out. Every show in this network is fantastic. I know I'm supposed to say that, but I worked very hard to line up the best I could get, and I feel like I did pretty good. We will be back on Thursday to make picks with Daniel and Chris, and for me to enjoy my week 1 victory. Just keeping it going from last season. What can I say? I'm going to brag here and not on Thursday because that would not be very nice.